Hi, everybody, and welcome to another live Google Hangout. I'm Dr. Jay Harness, Medical Director at Breast Cancer Answers. And today we really have an exciting guest with us and a really, in my view, important area of cancer research and maybe what's going to be the future of the treatment of all cancers. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Keith Knutson from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Keith, welcome, and tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your interest in immunotherapy.
Well, I've been involved with the development of novel immune-based approaches for both breast and ovarian cancers now for about 15 years. My training was at the University of Georgia and subsequently at the University of Washington as a postdoctoral fellow, after which I moved to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester in 2005 and became part of their cancer immunology and immunotherapy program, where I really became very much interested in developing vaccines to prevent recurrence of both breast and ovarian cancers.
So your background, your PhD is in what, Keith? What's your focus of your PhD?
The focus of the PhD was actually in endocrinology and with an emphasis on pharmacology and toxicology at the cellular level. And then I became interested in applying those skills to immunology, and my subsequent postdoctoral training was immunology focused, and that's where I became interested in developing vaccines for breast and ovarian cancer.
Super. Well, let's deal with some of the basics. You know, we talk here at Breast Cancer Answers, and we also have a site called Colon Cancer Answers, plus another site for prostate cancer. Let's define for people, what is cancer?
Yeah, so that's always a tricky question. When we think of tumors, oftentimes we think that tumors are cancer. In fact, there are multiple different kinds of tumors, and I guess what distinguishes cancer, which is a type of tumor or an abnormal growth of cells, is that it is invasive, so that it is able to migrate throughout the body and to invade tissues. And so you often hear the term metastasis. And metastasis is a lesion or a tumor that's derived from the primary tumor. So for example, in breast cancer, you can have metastasis to the bone, which often happens. So those cells that became abnormal in the breast migrated using their invasive capabilities to other regions in the body, and that's what distinguishes cancer from other tumors, which don't spread or invade into other tissues.
Yeah, another definition, that's a beautiful, fantastic definition, but another, how do I put this, add-on to what you've been describing, cancer cells, in my view, are a loss of normal growth control mechanisms. In other words, cells are born, they have a normal lifetime, and they normally die. One of the terms for cancer cells is immortal cells. They may not go through that apoptosis phase, that death phase. You want to comment on that as well?
That's true. So that is one of the hallmarks of cancer is they have acquired the capability of surviving under a variety of different conditions, including some of the harsh chemotherapies that are often used in patients with cancer. And so there's a number of pathways that give cells the capabilities of surviving different environments. And one of the properties of cancers is they've learned how to use this, or these properties, in order to survive the different conditions that they may find during treatment or throughout the body.
Yeah, some of the presentations, Keith, that I've seen recently by scientists like yourself who are really into this also talk about cancers as almost being organ systems. In other words, there may be some signaling mechanisms that can go on not only between where the cancers are originating, but their distant metastases and things of that sort. In other words, cancer is a really complex set of diseases. You want to comment on that?
Well, we do. There is a large number of research laboratories that have been, established in recent decades that are focusing on trying to identify novel approaches to treat cancer. And the progress, while there has been progress, has been slow because of the fact that you pointed out that it's very, very complex. And so there's multiple signals that the tumors can use to survive and spread in the body. And in fact, many of the strategies that are becoming useful today with respect to treating cancer have targeted some of these signals that the cancers use in the body. And that's been very effective in terms of treating or preventing some of these cancers.
Yeah, listen, that's an outstanding explanation. Thank you very much. One of the questions that I have for you as an immunologist looking at the immune system is, why doesn't the body recognize cancer as non-self? If we transplant a kidney into you without immunotherapy or suppression of the immune system, our body will destroy that transplanted organ or whatever it is in a matter of days. So why is it that the body can't recognize cancers as non-self and T cells just wipe them out?
That's a great question. That is a question that has boggled us scientists that work in this field for many, many years. And so let's just step back and compare it in a parallel fashion with what we talked about earlier. So we know that cancers have the capabilities of resisting apoptosis, being able to adapt to new environments in the body. And the same goes with respect to the immune system as well. And so the cancers themselves have acquired or can acquire the capability of evading the immune response. So the immune response does in fact recognize cancers. We've known that for a long time. But the cancers themselves, due to their deregulation or dysregulation, have acquired these capabilities of essentially evading what your immune system is throwing at it.
Yeah, and in some respects, they're too much like self to be called non-self. I guess maybe that's a simple explanation. And you used a fancy word a minute ago that I also used earlier called apoptosis. That's a big fancy word for our audience, which means natural cell death. Now, Keith, before we get into some of the specifics of the work that you're doing, as you know, we've had huge national headlines over vaccinations, and the latest thing has involved chickenpox. And so, oh my gosh, even smart people are not getting their kids immunized. Why don't you explain some of the theories, if you will, behind immunization, and then we'll get into the specifics of breast and ovarian cancer.
Well, I like to think of the immune system as your body's own natural drug-making machinery. That's how I think about it. The immune system is capable of making literally tens of millions of different types of drugs that target specific molecules that would be present, and we think of these in terms of, bacteria or viruses that would invade the body. And immunization trains the immune system to recognize those microbes, those viruses, those bacteria, so that it has the upper hand, the immune system has the upper hand at preventing those from causing an infection in the body. And so this drug-making machinery is typically very slow to emerge. So it takes on the order of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for the immune system to make a specific molecule that can recognize, let's just say the chickenpox virus or the measles virus or something like that. It takes weeks for it to develop naturally the first time that the immune system sees it. It's the second response that is very rapid, because once it makes the drug which in you alluded to T cells, but there's also antibodies, can be maintained in the body for long periods of time. And so when we immunize against measles, for example, we're training the immune system to make specific molecules that recognize measles. And then those essentially can circulate for long periods of time in the body. And when the immune system, again, encounters measles, let's just say in the environment, as we've seen recently, it can launch an immune attack very, very rapidly and prevent the infection, prevent the disease from spreading. So it's very important to immunize as many of the people as you can against an infectious agent like measles in order to prevent that spread. And there's a certain, for each virus or each bacteria that has a vaccine, there's a certain threshold of people that must be vaccinated in order to prevent the disease from spreading. Sure. And so it's greater than 90% for measles, for example, that must be immunized. And if you go below that, what happens is then you create a essentially a pool of viruses in the community that can affect or infect those individuals.
Okay, fantastic. Now, before we go, one more thing I want to bring up, just to show how complex all this is. I think it's about 2 years ago now, the National Cancer Institute published a paper on, I think it was called Genomic Atlas of breast cancers, and they reported on a little over 800 breast cancers, and when they drilled down to the molecular level, Keith, there were something in the magnitude of 30,000 gene mutations. So if you're going to start working on vaccines, if you will, for breast and ovarian cancer, given sort of that background, tell us more about how you're going to do that.
So that's a great question. So when a gene mutates, particularly a gene that makes a protein, then that protein can be mutated, and the immune system can recognize that mutated protein as being foreign, much like a foreign protein from measles virus or chickenpox or influenza or something like that. The issue with targeting those specific mutant proteins is that there is not a lot of common ones. Mutations that occur in cancer tend to be very sporadic. They occur throughout the genome, they occur in many proteins, and they occur in different areas of the protein. So it's very hard for us immunologists to get a handle on what those mutations are going to be so that we can develop, vaccines or other approaches that may target those mutated proteins. So it's very challenging for us to understand how we can incorporate this, what we call mutanome data, into vaccine research.
Oh, I love that. Mutanome, I love it. Anyway, well, Keith, give us an update. Where are we? Is there hope in the world of immunology when it comes to cancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a number of ways that we can think about developing a vaccine for breast cancer. The first way is to try to determine if there's a virus that causes breast cancer. Now, you can think about it in terms of, or in parallel with the cervical cancer causing virus, which is human papillomavirus. We've known now for many, many years that that particular virus causes cervical cancers, among other cancers as well, but primarily cervical cancer. And understanding that that virus causes cancer has allowed us to develop vaccines that are now used in young women and young men to prevent the development of cervical cancer. So that's one of the ways.
Yeah, and as you know, it's also associated with head and neck cancers as well. So,
right.
So the virus theory has certainly been out there for quite a while when it comes to breast cancer, but I'm not aware we've had much luck in identifying anything, have we?
Yeah, it's been very controversial. Many of the earlier studies have, for a variety of technical reasons, found viruses in lesions, in breast cancer lesions, but it's uncertain whether or not those viruses are the cause of breast cancer. And some of the new genomic studies that have been published in recent times have been unable to find evidence of virus as a causative agent of breast cancer. So while there is data, it's controversial, and many in the field don't believe that viruses or bacteria specifically cause breast cancer. Now, having said that, we could develop new technologies in the future that will enable a better look. But right now, we just don't have a strong handle on a viral cause.
Okay.
So the second way that we can think about this is the mutated proteins. So we could develop vaccines, but I've already talked about the challenges associated with trying to identify what are the common mutations. There are a few common mutations, but those tend to occur in low frequencies of breast cancer. So it's very difficult to try to establish a vaccine that can be used to treat or prevent breast cancer on a wider spread basis if you have mutant proteins that only occur in a small fraction of individuals. So the third way that us immunologists are thinking about this is breast cancers tend to activate expression of proteins to very high levels that your body normally doesn't see. So your body produces greater than 20,000 proteins from the DNA in each cell. And many of those proteins are expressed at very minute, very low levels. Cancers can upregulate expression of those proteins, oftentimes to use them to their advantage. Some of the things that we talked about is resisting chemotherapy or resisting harsh environments in the body, even the immune system. We can target those proteins that are upregulated. So that's been the path that many of us have been taking in the field recently in developing vaccines. So we have what we call self-antigen-based vaccines, and those are vaccines that target proteins that your body expresses, but typically expresses at very low levels. And we've immunized hundreds of patients using these kinds of approaches and found them to be very, very safe. And some of the data that's emerging now in more advanced clinical trials would indicate that this approach can protect patients from recurring. And hopefully, once we develop vaccines that we know are safe and can prevent recurrence in breast cancer, we can use those in normal, healthy populations in order to prevent breast cancer from occurring in the first place.
Well, Keith, this is absolutely fascinating. There's been a lot of work in your world with brain tumors, with malignant melanomas and others. Is it possible in your world to take and freeze the individual person's tumor, if you will, and then have a way of producing a vaccine for that individual person's tumor as part of helping to prevent a recurrence or even to help facilitate initial treatment? Is that outside the realm of possibility, or am I just having a little marijuana here this morning,
Well, yeah, no, so that is possible. And in fact, that's where we get into this concept of personalized medicine or tailored medicine. So there are other laboratories which are using the tumors and understanding the tumors using a variety of new techniques, genomics techniques, for example. And by applying those techniques to an individual's tumor, they can design vaccines specific for that tumor, then to subsequently give back to that individual once they've been diagnosed and treated for their disease. In order to train the immune system, as I told you, to get that early upper hand in preventing the cancer from coming back.
Yeah, a good example on a large scale is Herceptin, which is a monoclonal antibody-based targeted therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Harness, in his ideal world, would like to take Mrs. Jones' breast tumor. You know, we treat it surgically. We may give her initial chemo. She may do very, very well. Save that, have it frozen, and then turn it over to people like you to say, okay, let's make the Mrs. Jones monoclonal antibody therapy that we're going to give her, you know, and boost her if we have to down the road, so she's got a high sensitivity to that. Do you think that's within the realm of possibility, Keith, or not?
Definitely is within the realm of possibility.
Yep.
So these kinds of approaches are very, very difficult when dealing with regulatory bodies. And so as we usher in the new era of genomics and translational medicine and some of the ideas that you brought up, we need to think about what changes we need to make at the national level to foster the development of those strategies. Because, as you know, oftentimes these new treatments that we have to go into large phase 3 clinical trials with hundreds, thousands of individuals. And if you're dealing with a personalized therapy that is specific for the tumor of a particular person, that's a challenge to deal with that.
Yeah, it sure is, my friend, and the whole clinical trial world needs to be changed dramatically. We need to do some really dramatic things. Keith Knutson, you are articulate, you are full of just fantastic information. How best, give me, when you're talking to your friends and your neighbors, share with us what your enthusiasm is about the future as we sort of wrap up our hanging out together.
Well, like any area, specific area of cancer treatments, there's ups and downs. So there's peaks and valleys. And for many years, immune therapies were not necessarily high on the list. But in recent years, there's been a number, and Herceptin is just a great example of how we can apply immunology to treat and prevent cancers from occurring. But even more recently, there are a number of antibodies that have been developed based on the immune system that we are using and that have been approved for treatment of other cancers like malignant melanoma, for example. And when these are applied, oftentimes there are complete clinical remissions in patients that had no alternative strategies or treatments left that they could use to survive. And by boosting the immune system, these responses are very, very durable, so they last a long time, and patients can go on to live for many more years without having problems. So we're very excited.
Yeah, listen, this has been great to hang out with you, literally, here. You bring up something that we've all seen anecdotally, so-called spontaneous remissions of cancers. My thought process has been, finally the body recognized it as non-self. T killer cells and the immune system responded and wiped things out. What we have to do is figure out how to organize and make that happen therapeutically, don't we? And you are working on the mechanisms to try and trigger those kinds of responses, etc. Correct?
That's correct. The immune system is, as I had mentioned earlier, vast. It has vast capabilities, but it also has vast controls. We know from the study of autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus that the immune system can be very, very harmful and can cause a lot of damage in the body. And so there are a number of regulatory mechanisms that are in place to control that immune response. So in addition to the complexities of what the immune system can do, there's an equal number of complexities with respect to how you regulate the immune system.
Yep.
So we're trying to uncover all of these mechanisms and figure out how we can apply to individual cancers which of these regulatory mechanisms we can turn off so that we can actually attack the tumors.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Keith, we're going to wrap it up here. I really want to invite you back in the future.
Sure.
We'd like to stay in touch with you. You're so articulate, and I think our audience as we share this live hangout, and we'll break it up into different component parts. I think people are going to get a lot out of this. I come away from this hangout feeling really hopeful that we've got people like you working on trying to understand the intricacies, if you will, of our wonderful friend, our immune system. So I'm Dr. Jay Harness. It's been a pleasure to be with you today and to have the privilege of your time. He's Dr. Keith Knutson at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. We want to thank you all for the privilege of being here. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jay.